Hi, I'm Martin Rust. I'm with the Security and Policy Institute for Professional Development here at the University of Ottawa. My guest today is Scott Gilmore, former diplomat and current columnist with Maclean's Magazine. Scott, I want to talk to you a little bit about spying and the intelligence gathering business and how it's changed over the years and how is it relevant today.
Okay, sounds interesting. Where would you like to start?
Well, my premise is that it has changed over the years and that how it impacts policy making is probably different today than it was before.
Right. Well, I have to preface what I say by the fact that I've been out of government for 10 years now, and it's been a very dramatic 10 years on this particular issue. A lot has changed. But there were some tectonic shifts that were taking place post 9/11 when I left in 2004 that were very obvious and I believe have continued. One of them was that there was a growing influence given to intelligence material. Just the mere adding of intelligence or the classification of a piece of material as being top secret suddenly moved it to the top of the file in terms of how policymakers were taking decisions, which can be very problematic. You know, simply because somebody told you something in confidence doesn't necessarily mean that that's a more useful piece of information for policymakers than something that was said in the pages of The Economist magazine. And we often had to fight against that in my previous role at Foreign Affairs.
Yeah. So it seems to me that the business of intelligence gathering is more prevalent today in Canada, in the Canadian context, than it ever has been before.
Absolutely. You just have to take a look at the budgets and what's being spent on it. You take a look at the fact that we're now actually very trepidatiously moving internationally with our collection of intelligence. You take a look at the general centralization of the importance of intelligence in Western governments. Given what's happened over the last 15 years internationally and with the growth of the war on terror, intelligence agencies have never been more influential and never been more important.
And how has the gathering of intelligence changed over the years?
Well, unfortunately, I think that we have we've fooled ourselves into thinking it's gotten better, when in fact it's become more voracious. We've become very, very good at gathering intelligence out of the ether, of collecting SIGINT. And HUMINT has not, the gathering of old-fashioned intelligence from individuals and from people hasn't kept pace. And I use small I intelligence in answering that. I'm not talking about strictly the people at CSE or at CSIS, but just in the gathering of information generally by the government. And to illustrate an example, one that's often bothered me, is that if you're a junior Canadian diplomat that's just been posted to the embassy in Prague, you're required to take a year of Czech training before you go. And yet, after having participated in a decade of war in Afghanistan, there's still almost nobody at Foreign Affairs who speaks Pashtun or Dari, at least not in the Foreign Service. It just wasn't prioritized in terms of where they're going to spend their budget money. So we'll put a satellite up, but we're not going to put somebody on the ground who understands the nuances of Pashto tribal conflicts in the Kandahar region. Now, I'm sure those people exist, but they surely don't exist to the extent that we need them.
So how do you think that impacts the policy level? So how does the information, what kind of filter does that go through? How does that filter all the way back up to the folks who are looking at what decisions they make?
Yeah. Well, filtering is an important issue. I remember back, in fact, one of the reasons why I left the Foreign Service was I realized that my job was postman, that what would happen is I would come to my desk in the morning and there would literally be a foot of material waiting there. Maybe about 8 inches of unclassified, about 3 inches classified secret, and about 1 inch of top secret, and then a couple little pieces right on top of that. And all I would do all day was decide, should I read this? Should someone else read this? Does this have to be moved? And I would pass it back and forth all around. And so that fire hose of material didn't used to be filtered very well. And I'm not sure if it's improved as it is now. And it also wasn't, the fire hose wasn't being collected by analysts who knew what to do with it. And I say that being one of those people. I was one of the clients that took that information and was trying to make something of it. Now, at that particular time, I was responsible for South Asia, an area that went from Bangladesh to Afghanistan and south to Sri Lanka. I didn't speak any of the original any of the local languages. I had only visited those areas maybe a handful of times, never more for a week at a time. my knowledge, my depth of knowledge for that area was very, very thin, and it was, I was trying to drink from a water hose to bring myself, or from a fire hose to bring myself up to speed on that. And so unfortunately, a lot of that very, very well collected intelligence was wasted on me because I simply wasn't a South Asian expert.
So what advice would you give to a young diplomat today entering the service, well-intentioned, good purpose? How would you advise them to deal with that kind of an environment?
Well, listen, if I would suggest that if they want to have fun, be a generalist, which was what I was. Bounced around all over the place, and was usually thrown into the less attractive spots where I was having the most fun. If you want to be useful, be a specialist. Learn a language. Spend some time on the ground there. Perhaps spend some time on the ground there outside of the Foreign Service before you even join or take a leave to do so with the United Nations or with an NGO or another international agency. And learn about the areas that matter so that you can use that material, that intelligence, usefully.
Yeah, very good advice. I'm Martin Rust with the Security and Policy Institute for Professional Development here at the University of Ottawa. My guest today is Scott Gilmore, former diplomat and current columnist with Maclean's Magazine. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.